Okay, let's unpack this a bit. I mean, think about the choices you make every day that involve some kind of risk, right? Betting at a casino, definitely risk. Even deciding, where exactly to park your car downtown, that's a risk too. Businesses face these decisions all the time, but often on a much bigger scale, especially with technology and all their data. So today we're doing a deep dive into security risk management for businesses. We've got this excerpt from a book on the topic, and our mission really is to explore how companies figure out what's risky, how they try to measure that risk somehow, and, well, what they decide to do about it. It's all pretty structured, apparently, but getting a handle on it gives you, the listener, a real insight into how businesses try to protect themselves. It's a complex world out there.
It really is. And the framework from the source material is super useful for navigating that complexity. It gives everyone a common language, a process.
Right. So where do you even begin when the goal is protecting, well, everything?
You start by figuring out what everything actually is that matters. The first step, according to our source, the absolute fundamental starting point is identifying and classifying your assets.
Assets. You mean the actual stuff you care about protecting?
Exactly. The source uses this great analogy. Imagine leaving, say, a kilogram of trash outside your door overnight versus leaving a kilogram of 24-karat gold. Which one are you going to be more worried about come morning?
Huh. Definitely the gold. The trash. Probably still going to be there.
Precisely. Businesses have to do the same thing, figure out what their gold is. Could be equipment, critical data, software they've built, even their reputation. Once they know what's valuable, then they can focus on protecting it.
Okay, first step. Know your gold from your trash. Got it. What's the next layer then?
Okay, once you know your assets, the source brings in 3 key elements. Think of them as the ingredients needed for a risk event to actually happen. They are risk, threat, and vulnerability.
Ah, yeah, we hear those words thrown around a lot. How does the source define them here, specifically?
So risk is defined as the probability of something happening that results in a loss. Could be financial, operational, loss of service. It's the chance something bad happens to your valuable asset.
Okay, so the likelihood of my gold getting pinched.
Exactly. Now, a threat is the potential cause of that loss. It's the person or thing that might try to exploit a weakness to cause harm. The thief who might take the gold, or, say, a hacker trying to steal your data. Threats exploit weaknesses.
Got it. Threat is the who or what with bad intentions. And vulnerability.
A vulnerability is the weakness. It's the flaw in your system or your environment that a threat can actually use. The unlocked door where the gold was, right? Or an IT, maybe a software bug, a weak password, a poorly configured firewall.
Okay. So the vulnerability is kind of like the hole in the fence that the threat climbs through to create the risk.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah.
Yep.
You need all 3. Something valuable, someone or something wanting to harm it, and an opening they can use. Take away any one of those, and that specific risk just doesn't happen.
Okay. Identify assets. Understand the threat-vulnerability combo that creates risk. That makes sense as a starting point for spotting potential trouble.
Right. And once you've spotted these potential problems, you need a systematic way to, assess them. The source calls this risk assessment the process to identify, analyze, and evaluate risks so you can make smart decisions. But what's interesting is companies don't just do one kind of assessment.
Oh. They have different approaches, like different tools for different situations.
Exactly right. The source outlines 4 main types. First, there's ad hoc. This is spontaneous, usually reacting to some new, unexpected threat or event that pops up.
Like when some huge new software flaw is discovered globally and everyone scrambles to check if they're exposed.
Precisely that. Then you have recurring assessments. These are scheduled, like a regular security audit, maybe every 6 months or annually.
Your basic checkup, keep things tidy.
Yep. Then one-time assessments. These are for specific projects, like before you launch a brand new online system, you do a thorough one-time assessment.
Makes sense. You definitely want to kick the tires properly before pushing it out to the world.
For sure. And finally, there's continuous assessment. This is the most dynamic. It's about real-time monitoring, analysis, baked right into your daily operations.
Wow, continuous sounds intensive. Is that the ultimate goal, to get everything under continuous monitoring?
Well, continuous is definitely becoming more crucial, because threats change so fast these days. It helps you spot things immediately. But the other types, they still have their place. For less critical systems, maybe, or for providing that broader periodic overview that constant monitoring might miss, often you need a mix.
Okay, so we've identified risks, we've assessed them in various ways. How do you actually figure out how bad they could be, put some kind of measure on them.
That's where risk analysis comes in. And the source makes a key distinction between two main approaches, qualitative and quantitative.
Qualitative. That sounds less about hard numbers, more descriptive.
It is. It uses subjective judgment, essentially. You're sorting risks into categories, think high, medium, low, based on how likely you think they are and what their impact might be.
So maybe not super precise, but easier to get a quick feel for things.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
And a common tool here, mentioned in the source, is the risk matrix or a heat map. It visually plots risks based on those likelihood and impact categories.
Ah, the grid with all the colors. Red means danger, Will Robinson. Green means, probably okay.
Exactly that idea. The source's figure 24.1 shows it clearly. High likelihood plus high impact lands you squarely in the severe damage zone. These charts are really effective for communicating risk levels quickly, especially upwards to senior management who aren't deep in the technical weeds. Gives that dashboard view.
Yeah, it gives that quick visual. But I guess if something lands in that bright red O zone, you probably need more than just a color to decide what to do next, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where quantitative risk analysis really comes into its own. The goal here is to assign actual numerical values, dollar figures usually, to those risks. This gives you a much more precise measure of potential loss and helps you make really data-driven decisions about where to spend your mitigation budget.
Okay, now we're talking actual money. Put in dollar signs on potential problems. How on earth do you start doing that?
The source gives us a pretty clear method, especially useful for calculating potential equipment loss. It uses three main building blocks, SLE, ARO, and ALE.
SLE, ARO, ALE. Okay, let's break those down.
Right. SLE is single loss expectancy, pretty
Yeah.
straightforward. It's the monetary value you'd lose if one specific asset item is gone. So if a company laptop is worth, say, $1,000, the SLE is $1,000, just the value of losing one.
Got it. One item's cost.
Then ARO, annualized rate of occurrence. This is how many times you expect that specific loss to happen in 1 year. If your IT department loses, on average, 6 laptops a year, the ARO is 6. It's about frequency.
Okay, how often the bad thing happens annually?
And finally, ALE, annualized loss expectancy. This is the big one. The total expected financial hit from that specific risk over a whole year. And the formula is beautifully simple. ALE equals SLE x ARO.
ALE equals SLE times ARO. So you take the cost of losing one thing, multiply it by how many times you expect to lose it in a year, and that gives you the total expected annual damage.
That's exactly it. The source provides an example. A company loses about 300 laptops a year, and each one is valued at $850.
Okay, so SLE is $850, ARO is $300.
Right. So the ALE calculation would be 850 times 300, which comes out to $255,000 per year. The source calculation was slightly different, $256,200, but the principle is the same.
Over $250,000 just from lost laptops. Suddenly putting a number on it like that totally changes the perspective, doesn't it? It's not just some IT department hassle. It's a serious financial line item.
It absolutely transformed it. It becomes a tangible business problem with a quantifiable cost. And having that number, that ALE, is incredibly powerful for making decisions. The source points out, you can then compare this ALE, the $255K expected loss, to, say, the cost of insuring those laptops. If the insurance costs $21,350 a month, that's about $256,200 a year.
Huh. So in that case, the expected cost of just losing the laptops is almost exactly the same as paying for the insurance.
In this particular example, yes, it lines up very closely. So this calculation helps the company ask, is the insurance premium worth it compared to the expected loss? Or maybe investing in better security policies or tracking to reduce the ARO to lose fewer laptops might be a smarter, more cost-effective strategy in the long run. The math directly informs that spending decision.
That's really fascinating, how a simple formula like that can drive such a critical business choice. Now, beyond SLE, ARO, ALE, the source mentioned a few other quantitative bits and pieces.
Yes. They add more layers to quantifying risk. There's probability, or sometimes called likelihood, basically the chance of an event happening, often on a scale like 0 to 10, helps gauge frequency. And impact, which is the consequence or effect if the risk materializes, usually expressed as a total potential monetary loss if the worst-case scenario happens for that event.
Okay, probability is how likely, impact is how much damage if it hits.
Correct. And then there's the exposure factor, or EF. This one's interesting. It's a percentage representing how much of an asset's value is expected to be affected if the risk occurs. It helps refine the potential loss. It's not always 100% destruction, right?
Right. So EF is like, if the server room floods, maybe only 40% of the servers actually get water damage, that kind of thing.
Exactly like that. It assesses the extent of the damage within the overall impact. The source uses these concepts in an example with a fictional bank, Fin123. They're looking at a security vulnerability in their online system. The potential total impact if this gets exploited is estimated at $500,000. The probability of this specific exploit happening within a year is judged to be 0.1 or 10%. And if it does happen, the security team figures about 40% of the system could be affected. So the exposure factor, EF, is 0.4.
Okay, $500 K potential hit, 10% chance it happens this year, and if it does, 40% of the system is exposed.
So the source then calculates what it called the effective impact using these numbers. The formula is effective impact equal to 1 beat X probability X exposure factor.
Okay, let's crunch that. $500,000 times 0.1 times 0.4.
Yeah.
Carry the 1, that's $20,000.
Exactly, $20,000. And according to the source, this effective impact figure tells Fin123 the expected annual loss specifically tied to this one vulnerability. It's not the total potential breach cost, $500, but the calculated exposure just from this single weakness, considering its likelihood and exposure. This helps them decide how much effort or money to put into fixing this specific problem. Does it justify a quick $1,000 fix, or does it warrant a $50,000 project to re-architect something?
That makes so much sense. It helps you prioritize. You figure out which open windows are potentially costing you the most on an ongoing basis based on the specific threat and vulnerability. It puts the quantitative analysis to practical use.
Absolutely. It connects the numbers to resource allocation. So once risks are analyzed like this, companies need tools and strategies to actually manage them. A really key tool here is the risk register.
The risk register, what goes in there? Is it just a big list of worries?
It's more than just a list. It's a dynamic document, really central to tracking everything. It logs the identified risks, sure, but also key information about them. This includes things like KRIs, key risk indicators. These are specific metrics that act like early warning signals, telling you if a particular risk exposure is increasing.
Like a check engine light, but for business problems.
That's an excellent analogy, yes. The source gives an example. Maybe a rising number of failed online transactions could be a KRI for a potential system issue. The register also clearly identifies risk owners. These are the individuals or teams specifically accountable for managing each identified risk. Someone owns it.
Okay, so assigning ownership is key. Prevents risks from falling through the cracks because everyone assumes someone else is handling it.
Precisely. Accountability. And the register also includes the risk threshold. This is the level of risk the organization has decided it's willing to accept for a particular area. If a KRI shows the risk is creeping above this threshold, it triggers mandatory attention or action.
Defining that line, where we're okay with this, becomes, we need to do something NOW.
Exactly. It's about setting that trigger point.
Setting that threshold must be tricky, though. You're balancing the potential downsides against, actually getting things done and pursuing opportunities. Which kind of brings us to risk tolerance and risk appetite. Are those just two ways of saying the same thing?
They sound similar, but the source clarifies they're distinct concepts. Risk tolerance is described as the organization's personalized threshold for embracing the unknown, usually applied to specific risks or decisions. How much variance are you willing to accept?
The source examples were helpful here, like a venture capitalist having high tolerance for losing everything on one startup investment, hoping for that huge payoff, compared to a retiree putting savings in bonds, very low tolerance, prioritizing safety above all.
Right, exactly. Tolerance is about the acceptable level of deviation around your objectives for a given risk. Risk appetite, on the other hand, is broader. It's the overall level and type of risk an organization is willing to pursue or accept to achieve its strategic objectives.
Okay, hang on. So appetite is more like the company's overall attitude or philosophy towards taking risks strategically, while tolerance is the specific limit or acceptable wiggle room for individual risks within that strategy.
You've got it. Appetite sets the general tone, the strategic direction regarding risk. Tolerance defines the boundaries for specific risks within that appetite. The source uses the idea of appetite setting the tone and tolerance being the safety net. And for appetite, the source describes three broad categories. Expansionary, where companies actively embrace higher risk for innovation or competitive advantage growth might trump security concerns sometimes. Then conservative, where they prioritize security, stability, and risk mitigation, often rejecting opportunities if they seem too risky. And neutral, trying to balance the two, assessing things case by case. This can sometimes lead to internal tension, if different parts of the business have different leanings.
That paints a really clear picture of how different company cultures might approach risk. Okay, so You know your risks, you know how much you can tolerate, you know your overall appetite. What are the actual strategies for dealing with these risks? What can you do about them?
Good question. The source lays out a kind of toolbox of risk treatment strategies. First up is risk transference. Basically, shifting the risk, or at least the financial impact, to a third party.
Like buying insurance, right? Car insurance covers accident costs. Cyber insurance covers breach costs.
Perfect examples.
Well,
Or sometimes outsourcing a function, like IT support, where the contract shifts some operational risk to the vendor. Next is risk acceptance. This is a conscious decision to just acknowledge a risk exists, but take no action to reduce it, usually because the potential impact or likelihood is deemed low enough for that organization.
like the source's example, a company based in Scotland probably doesn't need to spend money on earthquake insurance. The risk is technically there, but it's so minimal they just accept it.
Precisely. Then you have risk exemption. This is a bit more formal. It's documented relief from having to follow a specific rule or policy, because doing so is truly impractical or maybe even impossible in a particular context, usually for a set period.
So it's like getting a formal approved pass on following a rule because the rule itself just doesn't fit the situation.
Yes, exactly, which is different from risk exception. An exception is usually a temporary, approved deviation from a policy. Often, you'll need to put in place other compensating controls to maintain a level of security, even while deviating.
Okay, I think I see the difference. Exemption is more about this rule is wrong here, while exception is we need to bend this rule temporarily, but we'll add extra safety measures over here.
That's a good way to summarize the distinction. Then there's risk avoidance. This one's pretty straightforward. Just choosing not to do the activity that creates the risk in the first place, because the risk is considered too substantial. The source uses a simple example. Don't jump off a very high ledge if you don't have safety gear. Avoid the activity, avoid the risk.
Ha! Can't fall if you don't jump. Makes sense.
And finally, the one we probably think of most often, risk mitigation. This involves taking active steps to reduce the likelihood or the impact of a risk. Installing antivirus software is a classic mitigation example.
Trying to make the bad thing less likely to bite you or less painful if it does.
Exactly. And this is often discussed using two related terms. Inherent risk, which is the sort of raw risk level before you apply any controls and mitigation, and residual risk, which is the smaller amount of risk that inevitably remains after you've put your mitigations in place. Your antivirus reduces the inherent risk of malware, but there might still be a tiny residual risk from some brand new threat it doesn't catch yet.
Right. It feels like there's almost always some residual risk left over, no matter what you do.
That's often true, which is why risk management is an ongoing cycle, not a one-off task. These strategies give companies a whole range of options for how to respond once they understand their risks.
And presumably all this analysis and these decisions need to be communicated effectively. The source mentioned risk reporting.
Absolutely essential. Reporting is how you consolidate and present all this risk information. The source highlights a few key reasons why it's so critical. It enables truly informed decision-making by leaders. It builds confidence with stakeholders like investors or customers through transparency. And often, it's flat-out required for compliance and regulations. It closes the loop.
Right. You can't make good decisions if the info is stuck in a spreadsheet somewhere. Makes sense. Now, speaking of consequences, what happens when things do go wrong? The source talks about business impact analysis, or BIA. What's that about?
BIA is crucial for understanding the potential fallout from disruptions. Its main purpose is to identify those critical single points of failure in your business operations. And really importantly, understand the consequences if they fail. What happens to the business? This includes financial losses like lost sales, maybe fines and operational impacts like systems being down, people unable to work. It focuses squarely on the business impact.
So it's not just the server crashed, it's the server crashed, which means we couldn't process orders for 4 hours, which cost us X amount in lost sales and Y in recovery effort.
Exactly that, connecting the technical failure to the business pain. And within BIA, the source defines some key metrics that help companies plan for recovery. These are RPO, RTO, MTTR, and MTBF.
Okay, more acronyms, but they sound important for recovery planning. Let's unpack them. RPO first.
RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective. This is all about data loss. It defines the maximum age of data that the organization can afford to lose during an outage. So an RPO of, say, 3 hours means the business has decided it absolutely cannot lose more than 3 hours worth of data.
Yeah.
Which means they need to be backing up critical data at least every 3 hours.
Okay, so RPO answers. How much data are we okay with just losing forever if everything goes kaput right now?
That's the core question it answers, yes. Then there's RTO, Recovery Time Objective. This one is about downtime. It's the target time within which a business process or system must be restored to a functional level after a disaster or disruption. If a critical system fails at 1 p.m. and the RTO is 3 hours, the goal is to have it back up and running, usable, by 4 p.m.
Gotcha. So RTO answers, how quickly do we absolutely need the lights back on and things working again after a crash?
Correct. Next is MTTR, mean time to repair. This is an average measure. It tracks how long it typically takes to fix a specific type of failed system or component once it breaks down. The source uses a simple example. If a system breaks at 2 p.m. and is fixed by 4 p.m., the MTTR for that incident was 2 hours. It's a measure of repair efficiency over time.
So this tells you, on average, how long does it usually take our team to get that broken server back online once they start working on it?
Precisely. And finally, MTBF. Mean time between failures. This is a measure of reliability. It's the average amount of time a system or component operates without failing.
Ah, the average time between the failures happening.
Yes. A system that breaks down frequently has a low MTBF. It's unreliable. A system with a high MTBF runs for long periods without issues. It's reliable.
Okay, this sounds like the kind of stat you'd really care about when buying something important you need to count on, right? Like a critical piece of manufacturing equipment or maybe a fleet of delivery trucks. You want that MTBF number to be high.
It's exactly that kind of reliability metric, but applied to all sorts of business systems, including IT. Understanding these BIA concepts, RPO, RTO, MTTR, MTBF, helps companies plan not just how to prevent problems, but how to recover effectively and minimize the damage when disruptions inevitably happen.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered a lot of ground here. From the very beginning, identifying what's valuable, spotting the threats and vulnerabilities, through assessing risks qualitatively, quantitatively with things like ALE and effective impact, using tools like risk registers, figuring out risk appetite and tolerance, then exploring all those strategies like acceptance or mitigation, and finally understanding the potential impact and planning recovery with BIA concepts like RPO and RTO. That is quite a comprehensive framework.
It really is. And getting your head around these concepts, even just the basics, gives you a much clearer lens for understanding the complex decisions businesses are constantly making. Decisions about protecting themselves, their customers, their data, in a world that's just full of dynamic threats. It connects all the tech talk about security back to the fundamental operational and financial realities of running a business.
It really does. Suddenly, when you hear about a data breach, it's not just some abstract headline. You can start thinking about it in terms of, well, what was their likely ALE for this kind of event? What was their RPO? How much data might be gone for good? What's their RTO? How fast do they need to recover?
Exactly. And considering how fast everything changes, technology, threats, even business goals, this whole process isn't something you do once and forget. As the source strongly implies, effective risk management has to be a continuous, constantly adapting process.
Yeah, that seems like maybe the biggest challenge of all, doesn't it? Just keeping up, trying to spot the new vulnerabilities, the new threats, when the systems themselves and how we use them are always changing. It sounds like a job that's never truly done.
It certainly keeps people busy.
So thinking about that continuous challenge, that constant motion, here's a thought for you, the listener. When you hear about a major company suffering a security breach next time, how might knowing about concepts like, say, annualized loss expectancy, ALE, or their likely recovery point objective, RPO, change how you interpret that news story? What does it tell you beyond just, they got hacked?
It's a great question. Knowing about ALE, for instance, might help you mentally frame the potential ongoing financial scale of the problem they face from that type of incident recurring. It's not just a one-off cost. And RPO. Thinking about their likely RPO gives you insight into the timeliness of their data backups. It hints at how much customer data, transaction history, or operational information might have been permanently lost in that incident, depending on when their last good backup was. It really helps you look past the initial shock of the headline to some of the deeper, quantifiable, and often painful consequences the business is likely grappling with.
That's a really insightful way to connect these concepts back to real-world events. It puts the impact into much more concrete terms, dollars, data loss, downtime, not just abstract security failure.
Gives you a more informed perspective, definitely.
Well, this has been a genuinely illuminating deep dive into the world of security risk management, drawing directly from our source material. Thanks so much for walking us through all these concepts.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And a big thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration helps you feel a bit more equipped to understand how businesses try to navigate the never-ending challenge of risk in our modern world.